Hello and welcome to another tier list video. Today we are taking a look at Risk of Rain 1 items. Now, as I mentioned in my other Risk of Rain video, I'm a huge fan of this game, definitely my favorite roguelike game by far. I've put well over 100 hours into this game on Steam, played it a lot of single player and played a lot of multiplayer. Really enjoy this game quite a lot. To keep this video from being 30-40 minutes long, I'm going to be breaking it into two parts. Part 1, I'm going to be looking at the common and uncommon items, and then part 2, I'll look at the rare, the boss items, and the usable items. So starting us off, we have War Banner, which is an item when you level up, you get attack speed, attack damage, move speed, and health regen within an area. And the more you stack them, I think gives you better and better stats and also increases the radius of the War Banner. This is an item that I think is actually decent to get in the early game. It's pretty good, gives you regen, damage, kind of all the stats that you want. That being said, when you get into the later portion of the game where you're not really leveling up very much because you're such a high level, it takes so long to level up, this item kind of falls off pretty hard. But in the early game when you're leveling up, a couple times a level, it definitely can help you out, help you clear stages a little bit better. So decent in the early game, but definitely does fall off really hard in the late game. And even in the early game, it's not necessary by any means. So it's honestly going to find itself in the C tier just because it's decent in the early game, but, as you get to, 30-40 minutes into your run, you're never proccing War Banner. Up next we have Medkit, which is an item where shortly after taking damage you heal, and I believe when you get more of these it just increases the amount that you heal by. I think this is an item that's really pretty good. It's not good if you're taking a ton of damage all at once because it is a delay until you're done taking damage. I think it's like 1.1 seconds of not taking any damage you heal. But this item is pretty good. If you stack a bunch of them, you can take a lot of damage and then heal a ton of your health back. So this is definitely a pretty solid item. If you don't have many other healing items, this is definitely a good one. If you have enough of them, you can take like a little bit of damage from somebody and then heal more health than you took from them. So you can kind of abuse that mechanic a little bit. So Medkit, definitely a solid item and going to find itself in the A tier. Up next, we have the Mortar. Now this thing, I don't know the exact percent chance. I want to say it's like 8% chance of shooting a mortar in front of you when you damage an enemy, and the mortar does do quite a lot of damage, and stacking it, the mortar, I don't think it becomes more likely to fire, but I do believe that the damage increases by quite a lot. So if you get a lot of these, you can really deal a lot of damage with it. That being said, it's better on melee characters, I would say, because the mortar doesn't fire very far, so if you're firing at something far away with another character, you're probably not going to hit it. Overall, it's a decent item, low chance to proc the mortar. Doesn't feel bad to pick this item up, but overall, I would say it's pretty mediocre. Just gonna give you a little bit of more damage, so it's gonna find itself in the C tier as well. Up next, we have Paul's Goat Hoof. Now this item, I love picking this one up. Gives you just flat percent move speed, and you pick up 3 or 4 of these, and it feels great. One of the most annoying things is playing a really long run where you're going really fast and then starting over on a new run and you don't have any of your Paul's Goat Hoofs. You feel so slow. So Paul's Goat Hoof, love this item. Move speed just feels so good, especially in Risk of Rain 1, trying to get from one side of the stage to the other because the stages can be so big. So Paul's Goat Hoof, definitely going to be in the S tier for me. Up next we have Head Stompers. There's a bit of a meme with me and some of my friends with this item. I absolutely love this item. I think it's garbage, but I love picking it up. And anytime you have the choice of like 3 items, and Head Stompers is one of those options, I am required to grab this one. Head Stompers, if you don't know what it does, basically if you fall from a far enough distance, you will deal damage to enemies when you land, and more Head Stompers you get, basically the more damage. Honestly, it's pretty bad. It's a pretty useless item. Even when you stack a lot of them, it still doesn't do a lot of damage, but I love buying it just because it's so bad. So in terms of usefulness, it's terrible, but just because it has a special place in my heart, I gotta put it in the A tier. Head Stompers, love that item. Up next, we have the Fire Shield. I can't actually remember the exact name of this, but basically, when you take damage, there's a chance that you reflect some of the damage, and the more of these you take, I don't think the percent chance goes up, but you do deal more damage. That being said, this item's okay. It's really only good if you're taking a lot of damage, which, ideally you don't want to take a lot of damage, so I don't think it's that great. Even when you stack it, it's not a whole lot, so it's going to find itself down in the D tier. Up next, we have the Kitchen Knife, which gives you a percent chance to make enemies bleed when you damage them. And I believe when you stack these up, it only increases the percent chance. I don't think it actually makes them bleed from more damage. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But for that reason, it's not the best. It's good. The bleed damage is pretty significant, especially in the early game. That being said, it's definitely not a required item. It's good, not great. Gonna find itself in the C tier. Up next, we have meat nuggets. This item's pretty garbage, honestly. It's like a really low percent chance, like a 6 or 8% chance that when you kill enemies, they drop meat nuggets, and they heal you like 2 or 3 health or something, and that increases the more you get. Meat nuggets, definitely one of the worst healing items in the game, gonna be in the D tier. Up next, we have spike strips. Another take damage, do something item. When you take damage, you basically drop a spike strip, which slows enemies by, I want to say it's like 20%. It's really not that much, and the more you get, it doesn't even increase the slow percentage. It's just increasing the length of the spike strip. So honestly, spike strip, really useless. Slowing down enemies, maybe it's okay, but only by 20%. It's just pretty useless. Gonna be in the F tier for sure. Up next, we have the Soldier Syringe. This item is great. Increases your attack speed. Has super good synergy with a lot of other items that proc off your attacks. So Soldier Syringe, definitely going to be in the S tier for me. Super good on pretty much every single character. Up next, we have the Taser, which basically gives you a chance to stun enemies when you hit them. This item is pretty good. If you stack up a lot of them, I think you can get a pretty good percent chance to stun them with the Taser. And while it's not, the best item in the game for a common item, it is pretty solid. Just not spectacular, so going to find itself in the B tier. Up next, we have the, I can't even remember the name of this one. Something fruit, strange fruit maybe, or maybe that's the red item I'm thinking of. But basically, I remember this item gives you healing out of combat. It's basically the potion. I actually don't even remember the name of this one. But basically, this item gives you healing out of combat for like 6 or 7 seconds. But it's a pretty small percent healing. If you don't have any other healing items, this can be decent, but as far as healing goes, it's really pretty slow, so going to find itself down in the C tier. Up next, we have the green potion. I'm drawing a blank on these 2 healing items. But this item is basically half as effective as the fruit, but it works in combat as well, so you don't need to avoid damage in order to get the healing. Overall, it's about as good, because you're probably going to be proccing this one way more often because it's always active. That being said, 50% effective compared to the fruit. It kind of balances out. They're both a C tier for me. Up next, we have the Hermit Scarf, which gives you a chance to dodge enemy attacks. Honestly, this is a really good item. I believe it caps out at 4 stacks, which I think the max is 35% chance to dodge, which is really pretty good. If you can stack up a couple of these in the early game, it can usually save your life. So Hermit Scarf, definitely a pretty good item. Going to be in the B tier, but of course, capping out at 4 stacks, not something you want to see too much in the late game once you've capped it out. Up next, we have the Piggy Bank, which is a gold generation item. It gives you like a gold a second or something like that. Maybe, I think even less, gold every 3 seconds at rank 1. Really a pretty useless item in my opinion. The gold generation is just so slow. And I mean, maybe if you're like a couple gold short at the end of a level for a chest, maybe it's useful, but most of the time there's just no point to it. Terrible gold generation, even if you have a lot of them, so definitely going to be in the F tier. Up next, we have Bustling Fungus. This one heals you for a pretty good percent of your max HP every second if you stand still for like 3 or 4 seconds. This is one of the better healing out of combat items. If you get a couple of these, you can stand still out of combat and you're going to be healed up to full health in no time. This one is super busted on Engineer because his turrets uses items, and so you can just stand next to your turrets and get healed forever. That being said, I'm not a huge fan of that playstyle. It's a little boring for my taste, but Bustling Fungus, one of the best healing items in the game, for sure. Going to be in the A tier. Up next, we have the, I'm drawing a blank on their name, the Crit Goggles is what I always call them. When you pick these up, you get a percent crit chance, and if you stack enough of them, you can get a 100% crit chance. Overall, this item is it's really good for a common that gives you crit chance. That's great. Pretty easy to stack these up, and definitely just a solid item. Critting makes it deal a lot of damage. Gonna be a solid A tier for me. Up next, we have the Goat Hide. This gives you like plus 8% on your max HP, which honestly is not that great. I'm somebody who always plays on glass mode, so this, especially early on, is pretty useless. Because especially since, you're kind of just looking for Infusion. Once you get Infusion, all other health increase items kind of become irrelevant, so the Goat Hide, honestly, going to be in the D tier for me. Up next, we have Fireworks, which basically shoots out some fireworks when you open up a container or chest or whatever. Overall, it's not very strong, but if you get a lot of them, it can be kind of exciting, you know, seeing the fireworks shoot out of the chests. That being said, definitely not great. You know, deals some damage. You know, maybe it helps to kill an enemy that's really far away, but fireworks, really not the best. It's going to be in the C tier. Definitely bottom of the C tier for me, though. Up next, we have Barbed Wire. This is a great item on melee characters, especially if you stack up a bunch of these. You don't even need to use your abilities. You can just run around and kill people with the Barbed Wire. Huge fan of stacking up just a bunch of Barbed Wire. Definitely a solid item. Good damage, you know, good radius if you have a lot of them as well. So Barbed Wire going to be in the A tier for me. Up next we have the Crowbar, which basically makes enemies take increased damage if they're above, I think it's 80% health. So super good, especially on certain characters like, you know, Chef or Bandit, especially if you stack up a bunch of crowbars on Bandit and then you just use your ult, you're just one-shotting everything. Super good. Love the crowbar. It's good on everybody, but super, super good on some people. Definitely going to be in the S tier for me. Up next, we have the Monster's Tooth. This gives you a little bit of health every time you kill an enemy. Overall, it's pretty good. If you stack up a lot of them, you can get some pretty good healing from it. Not the best healing item, but for a common, I think it's a pretty solid choice and good enough to be in the B tier for me. Up next, we have Snake Eyes, which gives you increased percent crit chance every time you fail a altar. Once you succeed at an altar, though, it resets. So this item, it's pretty RNG. You know, you pick up one and it's like, okay, you know, I don't really even pay attention. Maybe if you've failed like 4 or 5 altars in a row and you're pretty high in the dice, you can get decent crit chance from it, and maybe you don't want to do more altars. That being said, this item, you know, it's not the best. You know, at best, you're getting increased percent crit chance, which you could just get from other items. At worst, it's not doing anything. So Snake Eyes is going to be in the C tier, but again, another low C tier. Up next, we have Sticky Bombs, which every time you damage an enemy, you have a chance to throw a Sticky Bomb on them, and the more Sticky Bomb items you get, the percent chance doesn't go up, but the damage does go up by a decent amount. So if you get a lot of soldier syringes and a lot of sticky bombs, you can just tear people apart. That's a super deadly combo. If you haven't tried it, I recommend giving it a try. You know, on somebody like Commando or Huntress, it's super good. So sticky bombs, definitely pretty good item, gonna be in the A tier. Up next, we have the Charge Field Generator. This item, every time you kill an enemy, it'll create a little electric field around you, and it damages enemies inside. And basically, the more enemies you kill, the bigger it gets. And the more stacks you have, also the bigger it gets. And the faster it gets bigger, and also the more damage it does. Overall, this is a pretty good item. For me, it's kind of similar to Barbed Wire, but usually just gets much bigger, much quicker, but doesn't deal quite as much damage. But it's still a good choice for melees. You know, usually get a combo this with Barbed Wire, so good enough for a B tier for me. Up next, we have the Hopoo Feather. Every single one of these items gives you an extra jump. It just feels so good. I mean, even if you just get like 2 or 3 of these, it makes it so much easier to maneuver levels. Love the Hopoo Feather. Definitely the best movement item, I would say. Gonna be in the S tier for me, a must-have in the late game. Up next, we have the Energy Cell. Now, this is an item which has a mechanic that I strongly dislike. It's a mechanic where it only activates when you're at low HP. This item basically gives you more attack speed the lower HP you are, which honestly, I don't like items that reward you for being at low health or taking damage. So Energy Cell, not a huge fan, even though it does give you decent attack speed. You know, it only activates when you're below 50% HP and scales up the lower HP you are. Not a huge fan of the mechanic. It can be useful sometimes, but usually not going to save your life anyways, so Energy Cell going to be in the D tier for me. Up next, we have the Guardian's Heart, I believe is what this is called, and it basically gives you a shield of 80. For me, this item is okay to get in the early game on Glass Mode, because I play Glass Mode where your HP is 10% of what it normally is, so you're at like 13 health at level 1. So it can be decent to get in the early game on Glass Mode. That being said, in Standard Mode, this item's pretty useless, and even late game in Glass Mode, after you've had an Infusion stacking up for a while, this item's also pretty useless. So kind of like War Banner, it can be good in the early game, but you know, you get into the late game and the 60 or 80 shield that it gives you is really pretty irrelevant, so gonna be in the C tier just because it's decent to get an early game, but really falls off later. Up next, we have Filial Imprinting, which I actually really like this item. There's like these cute little slimes that follow you, and they drop little slime upgrades that give you sometimes movement speed boost, attack speed boost, health, regen. It gives you a bunch of random stuff. Honestly, kind of like these. They're not really that strong, but they're just cute. Good enough to find me in the B tier. Up next, we have the 56 leaf clover, which I really like this item. I always play with the artifacts of glass and the one that makes only elite enemies spawn. And 56 leaf clover gives you a % chance to get an item drop from elite enemies. So picking up these when you have that artifact on is super good because it helps you get way more items. Definitely a really solid item. Honestly, good enough in the S tier for me. If you don't play with the elite only enemies artifact on, it's probably not quite as good, but for me, definitely going to be in the S tier. Up next, we have the golden gun. This gives you increased damage the more gold you have, and it caps out at a certain gold. I'm not sure what it is, but overall, I think it's pretty good. It's not insane even when you have the max gold, but it is decent. It gives you a bit of extra damage. Definitely a solid item, but you know, it's limited in how strong it can be. But overall, still a good choice, gonna be in the B tier. Up next, we have the Harvester's Scythe, which is a really good item. It gives you crit chance, and it makes you heal every time you crit something. So overall, you know, pretty much all crit items are really good, and this item is even better, gonna be in the S tier for me. In my opinion, this is one of the best crit items because it gives you healing and crit chance, so damage and healing all in one. It's really hard to complain about this item. Up next, we have Dead Man's Foot, which, once again, is another item that only activates when you're at low health. I don't know the exact threshold this one activates at, but basically it drops a dead man's foot on the ground, and when enemies step on it, they take poison damage, I think, over time. The damage is actually pretty decent that it deals. That being said, it only activates when you're at low health, which means most of the time, for me, it's not going to be activating. So, Dead Man's Foot also going to be in the D tier. Up next, we have Concussion Grenade, which basically gives you a chance to stun enemies when you damage them. And I believe the more concussion grenades you get, it does increase the chance. So overall, this one is pretty good. If you get a lot of these and a lot of soldier syringes, you can stun enemies like pretty much indefinitely. Definitely a good choice. Gonna be in the B tier. Up next, we have Arms Race, which is basically really only a good item if you have drones, because this item makes your drones have a chance to fire rockets, which if you have a lot of drones and you have a few of these items, it's really good because your drones are going to be firing rockets nonstop. That being said, if you're not going for like a drone heavy build where you have a lot of drones, it's pretty useless. So for me, it's going to find itself in the C tier. Very situational item. Up next, we have the MK2, MK3 rockets. I don't know exactly. Basically, this is kind of like the Mortar, but better. It's the uncommon version of the Mortar is what I think of, because when you damage enemies, you have a % chance to fire rockets, but these are lock-on, so, you know, even if they're really far away, it's going to seek an enemy. And definitely a pretty solid choice. For me, it's pretty much like the Mortar. It doesn't scale up in damage quite as fast, but the lock-on effect is just so nice. Definitely a solid item choice, going to be in the B tier for me. Up next, we have the Boxing Glove, which basically just knocks back enemies. I believe if you get more of these, it just has a higher chance of activating and knocks them back a little bit further. Overall, it's okay, but knocking back enemies really isn't that necessary, honestly, and sometimes you don't want to knock them back because you're a melee person and you want to be able to hit them again without having to run at them. So, Boxing Glove, honestly, not a huge fan, gonna be in the D tier. Up next, we have the Icicles item. I'm drawing a blank. I want to call it Everfrost, but I don't think that's right. Anyways, the Icicles item is super good. Basically, when you kill enemies, it makes icicles spin around you, and the more of these you get, the higher the icicle cap is. So if you have a lot of these items, you can get like a ton of icicles around you, and as long as you keep killing enemies, the icicles will stay refreshed. And, you know, similar to barbed wire, you can just like stand next to enemies and kill them and get more icicles and more icicles. This item is super strong on melee characters. Definitely going to be a solid A tier for me. Up next, we have the best item in the game, Infusion. Pretty much a must-have on glass mode, which I pretty much only play glass mode. Infusion, it gives you 1 health every time you kill an enemy, and I think every other stack you get, it gives you 0.5 health per kill, so, you know, if you kill 2 enemies, you'll get 3 health. That being said, can't really say anything bad about this item, except that it caps out your health at 9999. Which honestly is plenty, because like basically 10,000 health. If you're taking 10,000 damage, you're either AFK or you're doing something really wrong. And at that point in the game, you probably have plenty of healing items as well. Infusion, it's just the best item. Gives you a lot of health, gives you that survivability, which is so crucial in glass mode. Infusion, definitely going to be in the S tier for me. Up next, we have the Red Whip. This item makes you travel fast outside of combat. Now, it feels really good to use outside of combat because you go really quick. It's much faster than the Pulse Goat Hoof buff, but the Pulse Goat Hoof buff works in combat, which is what I don't like about the Red Whip, because it feels weird for me to be moving fast and then take damage and then slow down. I don't like that changing of move speed just, sporadically, so I'm actually not a huge fan of Red Whip because every time I take damage, it slows me down and it feels bad. So Red Whip, actually not a huge fan, but it's still okay, so it'll be in the C tier. Up next, we have the Rusty Jetpack. This thing gives you increased jump height and also decreased gravity. This item is really good. You get a couple of these and a couple Hopoo feathers. You can pretty much reach anywhere on the level. That being said, don't get too many Rusty Jetpacks because if you get just a ton of them, gravity will be so low that it takes forever to fall. So if you want to go down to the bottom of the level, it takes ages. That being said, you get a couple of these and it feels so great. Rusty Jetpack, a solid A tier. Up next, we have the Toxic Worm, which is an okay item. It's not great. Basically, I believe when you damage an enemy, or maybe when you kill an enemy, it infects a different enemy, and basically does damage over time until the enemy dies, and then it jumps to another one. And I think the more of these stacks you get, I think you can actually have multiple of these Toxic Worms active in different enemies at a time. Overall, it's decent damage, decent damage over time, but it's really not the best, not necessary. It's just going to find itself in the C tier. Up next, we have Tough Times, which is the teddy bear that gives you armor. Basically, you can stack these forever, and if you have enough of them, you're pretty much just not going to take damage. But overall, Tough Times, nothing really bad to say about it. It just gives you armor, just feels good. Definitely going to be a solid A tier. Up next, we have Leaching Seed, which is another good item that gives you a lot of healing. Every time you damage enemies, it heals you for like 1 or 2 health, and then increases by 1 for every single stack you get. This one, once again, is another really good combo with Soldier Syringe. You get a lot of these and a lot of Soldier Syringes, and you can just heal non-stop just by firing whatever your basic attack is. So, Leaching Seed, definitely going to be in the A tier for me. Up next, we have Timekeeper's Secret. Now, this Hourglass is another one of those mechanics that I don't like, because it slows down time only when you get to low health, which I really don't like. That being said, this is definitely the best low health mechanic item because it freezes time for 3 seconds and increases by a second for every stack you get. So when you get to low health, it freezes time, so it can save you occasionally. That being said, you get to late game when you're not even getting to low health and you're never going to activate it. So as far as this mechanic of low health goes, it's definitely the best one. That being said, it's still a low health mechanic, which I hate, so it's just going to be in the C tier. Up next, we have Willow Wisp, which is basically an item where when you kill an enemy, it has a chance to blow up and deal damage to other enemies. Overall, it's pretty good. The more you get, the bigger the explosion, the more damage it does. Pretty solid item, helps you clear out large groups of enemies really quickly, so going to be in the B tier. Up next, we have the Ukulele, and his music was electric. I love this item, feels good. I love the thematic presence it has in the game, and honestly, it feels good on pretty much every single character. When you damage an enemy, there's a chance that it shoots an electric bolt that connects with other enemies. Another one that just helps you clear out large groups really easily. Ukulele, it's not the best item, but I love its theme. I love the ukulele, love picking it up, so gonna be in the S tier for me. Up next, we have Predatory Instincts, which is another crit item, and another one that's just really good. Every time you crit, you get increased attack speed, and the more you stack of these, the more the attack speed is, and also the higher your crit chance. So just another item that's really solid. Not quite as good as Harvester's Scythe for me because you're not getting that healing, but you are getting a lot more DPS with your crits, so definitely a solid A tier for me. Up next, we have the Rusty Shackles. This is another item that's pretty weak. Basically, every time you damage an enemy, it slows them. That being said, slowing enemies is just not that great. It's really not necessary. Doesn't help you survive better, really. Doesn't give you more DPS. So Rusty Shackles, honestly, going to be in the F tier for me. Up next, we have Panic Mines, which is one of my least favorite items in the game. Another one that is a low health mechanic item. When you drop to low health, you drop a bunch of mines on the ground that deal damage. The mines are not even that good. They're not that strong. Pretty underwhelming. Panic Mines overall, just a very underwhelming item. Going to be in the F tier as well. Well, that's my list. Let me know your guys' thoughts, and I hope you enjoy.